All right. Well, welcome everybody to today's ResNexus webinar. This one we've got a special one in store for you today. We're proud to host this discussion on experiential design in outdoor hospitality. This is going to be kind of the first in what we're hoping will be a series of webinars all around the topic. We're going to go kind of from, conception to development and on through sort of the creating an outdoor hospitality experience, exploring all different kinds of aspects of it, bringing in industry experts. So we're very, very excited about that. So definitely stay tuned for future entries in this webinar series and yeah, be a part of the discussion. We think it'll be great. Hosting or sort of driving the discussion today, I have with me Jeff Manno and Doug Higgins, co-founders of Hostel Cubed. They're one of sort of the premier examples of, outdoor hospitality, glamping, cabins, that kind of thing. And we're very, very happy to have them here. So they're going to kind of drive everything from here on out. I'll be here behind the scenes to help out and do polls and things like that. Speaking of which, we do have a poll live right now. If you haven't filled it out yet, please do so. We're trying to get a feel for what everyone's up to, what your situations are in regards to your outdoor hospitality properties. And if you put other, feel free to type something up into either chat or the Q&A, and so we can get sort of a better feel for that. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jeff and Doug to take things from here. Thanks everyone so much for attending.
Perfect. Thanks, Gavin. My name is Jeff Manno, partner at Hostel Cubed. We're excited to have a really interesting and healthy conversation today in really differentiation and experiential design. Many of you here are probably in the industry, joining the industry, or trying to evolve in the industry. And we know that this is a rapidly growing sector. And one thing we know based upon the hospitality sector is that there is always a history of commoditization across the industry. So differentiation and experience becomes uniquely important. But the question is always how? What do you do here? That's going to be a lot of what we're going to be tackling today, getting into and discussing and debating. So with us today, I am joined by David Smith, Todd Wynne-Parry, and my partner, Douglas Higgins, who's going to really pick up the mic here and carry our conversation forward. But we're welcome, everyone. We're excited for a good conversation, and please do type in your questions. One thing to last note too, if all goes well here, this will be the beginning of a multi-part series that we'll be kicking off here today and continue. So stay tuned for more webinars to come. Doug?
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. I won't rehash everything that that Hostel Cube does. We had a webinar a couple months ago that addressed most of that, and we can forward that link. But essentially, we make camping cabins that go in existing campgrounds and RV parks, and I'll kick it over to Todd and David to introduce themselves. Certainly esteemed panelists, experts in the outdoor industry. We're very lucky to have them. So Todd, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit and our audience about who you are and what you do.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Todd Wynne-Parry. I'm currently with Aramark, working on their acquisition strategy, buying assets for them. My background comes in primarily the hotel industry, hotel market studies, feasibilities, valuation, acquisitions, and development. Done that in Asia and here in the US over the last 30 odd years. The last 4 or 5 years of my career really pivoted to the outdoor hospitality sector. I had a brief stint with AutoCamp, helping them with their growth strategy, and then began consulting on my own for developers of glamping sites and brands trying to expand in and scale in the glamping area. And just was doing that up until October last year when I joined Aramark, and now I'm out looking for things to buy for them in the same outdoor hospitality sector.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Todd. I'll have a couple follow-up questions for you in a bit, but David, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your adventure in the outdoor world, how you got here and what you do now?
Yeah, thanks, Doug, Jeff, Gavin. Appreciate you guys inviting me to participate today. So David Smith, founder of a business called Outside Capital. Like Todd, my background's mostly in the hotel industry. I worked on the real estate finance side of the business for most of my career, originally in investment banking and then subsequent to that on the principal investing side of the business. Like Todd, fell in love with the outdoor hospitality sector a number of years ago and was fortunate enough to work for a group called Robert Douglas, which is a leading advisor on the capital market side in the outdoor hospitality niche. And then with Whitman Peterson, which was and is the primary capital provider to AutoCamp on their real estate portfolio. And then left to establish our own platform called Outside Capital about 3 years ago. We set up Outside Capital to serve as an investment management platform specifically for the outdoor hospitality niche. We've invested in projects in the space in a limited partner capacity and are increasingly getting involved in a sponsorship role, developing our own deals as well. So definitely looked at the industry from a number of different sides and incredibly excited about this space overall.
Awesome. Thank you. And it's just occurring to me, now that all three of you, Jeff, Todd, and David, we're all touching AutoCamp in some way, shape, or form. Would you say it's true for all of you that your involvement in that space kind of began, with something related to AutoCamp, or did any of you have experience in outdoors before that?
For me, I'd say that the root of the passion for me is my personal affinity with the outdoors and nature and my own personal beliefs that, if you kind of zoom out and look at consumer trends in the hospitality and the travel businesses writ large, that there are a lot of, long-term tailwinds that I think are driving people towards those types of experiences when they're traveling and looking for overnight accommodation. I do think that AutoCamp were, a legitimate pioneer in the space and did a lot of things that other people are trying to do now, probably before we were talking about it as an industry like this. So yeah, so yes and no, Doug. It's certainly got an enormous amount of admiration for what AutoCamp have done, and I'm sure you feel the same way, Todd.
Yeah,
especially since you did much of
it. I did a bit, but zooming out a little bit from my days in grad school, I did a thesis on the changes in the hotel industry through the 1980s, which was primarily a shift in two ways. One, where the CEOs of the hotel companies prior to the 80s were really, old Swiss chefs that emerged through the ranks and became, CEOs in these big hotel companies of some sort, or American chefs or whatever. It was always sort of this hardcore operations-based CEO, and that's just how the hotel companies were. And then there was a shift where they were like, had been the CEOs of a Pepsi or some retail company or some branding company. And then you saw this proliferation start of brands in different sectors of the industry under the same hotel company. And that was my thesis on how the hotel industry had emerged and changed. And then we saw subsectors, whether it was economy or limited service or extended stay, start to evolve, and each major hotel company wanted to have those. And then I was involved early with W Hotels. I did the first W outside of the United States in Australia prior to the Olympics. And I was amazed at that subsector of independent lifestyle boutique hotels having people come in that had never done hospitality before, or they did different parts of it before. And now they were getting into hotels and, really making a shift in how people looked at design and service. And kind of how the look and feel of a hotel would breathe and act over time. And it really changed it dramatically. And that continued up until, I would say, the end of 2018, when the company I was working for got sold to Hyatt. And so all of these small, independent, cool hotels got changed or got passed on to the big companies. And I felt it was sort of RIP cool hotel brands, because I felt the larger companies would just homogenize them and pasteurize them and lose the edge that the independents had of them. At that same time, I was seeing the emergence of the auto camps, the under canvas, and collective retreats. Again, people outside of the hospitality industry coming in and saying, "Wait, we can do this differently. We can provide great experiences in the accommodation world from a completely different perspective." And I was like, "Whoa, whoa! Here's all that energy and creativity from outside the sector coming in and really, upsetting the traditional hotel model." And so I really wanted to be on the front of that. And just as that was happening, Rob Stiles, the Robert of Robert Douglas, who David worked for, called me and said, "Hey, AutoCamp needs help in growing faster." And my history had been with growing brands faster if I could. And so I was doing pro bono consultant to the CEO to just look at different ways and short ways and styles of growing that might not be what they'd been looking at before. So that's where I got my interest in it and where I was excited. And luckily they asked me to come join them and kind of solidify that growth strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Doug, I think what's really fascinating, kind of piggybacking off Todd was saying, is I remember falling in love. Well, first of all, I was the kid growing up where my parents were always saying, get outside. So I grew up outdoors, literally spending most of my time in upstate New York exploring, and very much still live that lifestyle now, and an active venturer, surfer, hiker, glamper. But I remember about 9, 10 years ago, I was in the Philippines and discovered this incredible glamping place that no one had really known about, that was all the rave in the Philippines, outside the town of El Nido. I think it was called the Bird's Nest, and it was actually coincidentally founded by two people formerly working in tech from San Francisco, had moved out there from the heritage. And it was one of these incredible experiences that every media couldn't get enough of. And then I saw the same thing in Nicaragua, the placement there. Places that we would call glamping, they were just leaning into experience, embracing the locale, embracing the culture, embracing something, well, new and different, to Todd's point. They weren't just trying to do what's always been done. They were saying, hey, this is amazing, let's embrace it. And I think that's what's really special. And then go fast forward to my time at AutoCamp, they were always about that. I'd always built from the ground zero, like, how does this place speak to the experience? And then cultivating one with nature. And I think that placemaking was such an important part of the industry, and also certainly of AutoCamp's playbook that Todd and others wrote. And I was fortunate to be a part of, a few years later. But I think it's really interesting how the independents really are starting to influence some of the creative ideas that then others pick up and run with more dynamically and scalably.
Absolutely. So, one theme that came up in our discussion prior to this call was, the role of novelty in establishment of your concept. Whether that's a transformational concept, you're building something, you're taking raw land and creating something new, or taking an existing property that you have and improving it. It looks like, based on our poll, it's a pretty even distribution, but a few more people interested in the incremental, part of this, taking a property they have and making it better, And so I'm curious, in the projects that you've been involved in, how big a role is novelty, in the success, of that concept, and what else has, come into play, and what do you think is important now as you start to think about when you're developing a concept?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first stab at that one. I personally don't think that novelty is a very good foundation to build a business on, but I do think it is as a theme, something that, as a developer, as an operator, that you can leverage and take advantage of. I think that, just personally, my view is that if you look at the evolution of this outdoor hospitality industry in the last 10 years, and I think we should probably acknowledge at the top that there are so many different business types included in that term, right? From campgrounds and RV parks, which are certainly not a new asset type, through to, the auto camp glamping style development, which is, I think, not new either, but certainly sort of emerged in a more prominent way in that last 10 years or less. And then all the way up to what you see happening at the luxury end of the hotel market now, where I think, a lot of established brands and operators, as well known as Four Seasons and Aman and Ritz-Carlton, are trying to figure out how to integrate some of these outdoor hospitality concepts, tented camps and the like, into their properties. There are so many different varieties of this outdoor hospitality concept out there. Um, Personally, I think that if there's one, if there's one thing I believe that's changed or maybe evolved across all of these, facets in the last 5 or 10 years, but particularly in the more sort of, really like the more expensive applications of outdoor hospitality away from the more like utilitarian RV parks and campgrounds, is that, novelty is probably the extent to which you can rely on novelty, I think, is declining. I think we had a period immediately after COVID where, clearly there was a concentration of demand on outdoor hospitality for reasons that are pretty obvious in hindsight. People were flocking to the outdoors because there was a premium on personal space, and social distancing was a thing, and outdoor hospitality was perfect for that. No interior corridors, no elevators to share with other people, just you and nature. And I think there are a lot of different business models and qualities of execution in that environment that worked because it ticked that basic box that people were looking for. I do think as the industry, or those parts of the industry, as they've evolved and matured in the 5 years since then, that, obviously the COVID dynamics are not as relevant anymore, though I do think I think that you can look at COVID as an acceleration of a lot of trends that were around before COVID, but are still even more relevant now. But I think in general, there were probably business models that were able to survive on that, novelty value, as you say, Doug, that worked in that immediate post-COVID era that probably don't work as well now. I think that the consumer in general in outdoor hospitality is becoming better educated. They're seeing different types of properties. They're experiencing very professionalized applications of all of these styles of outdoor hospitality. And I think that as that trend continues to unfold, the bar goes up, and it's not just about novelty anymore. It's now about the same principles that hoteliers, have to struggle with and have struggled with for a long time, which is, knowing what your concept is, knowing what your guest wants, and then executing on that really well.
Mhm.
I would agree. I'll kind of echo on that in terms of the hierarchy of needs and where novelty sits in that in the guest decision process. It's I don't think it's a critical one, that's for sure. Just as using an analogy or whatever, when we were working, when I was with Commune and Two Roads Hospitality, and we had the Thompson brand in particular, and to a lesser extent the Joie de Vivre brand, we were always trying to figure out what was the ante, what was the baseline to get into a lifestyle or boutique independent hotel. What was the ante that the guest really needed? What was the baseline that was needed? And at the time, we were always looking at the demographics, but also the psychographics of who was our guest and who are they now and who would they be, and what's the baseline of what they would need. And at that time, it was sort of needed to have great, Wi-Fi connection, needed to have great design. Food and beverage had to be, on on point, and it had to be separately branded from the hotel. It couldn't be the hotel, all day dining. It had to be its own standalone sort of entity. The coffee in the morning had to be as good as the barista down the road at the artisan, roastery. And these were just the basics. And the design as well had to be, strong from a designer that really knew how to create aspirational environments. And in the old days, when people would go to a five-star hotel, you'd walk into the five-star bedroom and you're like, oh my God, I need to have this in my bedroom. This is what I need. I need that marble thing, or I need that light fixture. I need this bedspread. Or type of bed or whatever. And somewhere along the line, everybody got that in their own home. So the 5-star hotels were no longer aspirational. So now it was really cool design and contemporary design, or something that would be long lasting. And so that was the ante. And so when you transfer that over to the outdoor hospitality sector, I think you have to ask the same question. What is the ante? What do we need to get in here if we're going to do accommodation? If it's an RV park and it's, it's probably got a different set of basics in terms of your hookups and your level pad, and a great lounge area, maybe an elevated merch area for Gen Z millennials, as opposed to the Gen X and boomers and what they'll accept. And so I think for when you look at novelty in that hierarchy of what's going to get you that better rate or that better occupancy or that return customer or that elevated experience, you find novelty kind of drops down, and it's like it's not as important, and it's not the thing that's going to bring people back. Other things come in more important. What's your location? How good is your site? What is the experience you feel when you go in and when you leave? And what's the programming that takes place on your property? What are the other things you can do besides go to that national park or go to that lake or whatever? So I think David's exactly right. It's sort of, it's there. It's a thing, novelty, but I don't think it's what brings people back per se, and what's the long lasting sort of impression.
Mm-hmm. And part of the reason I'm asking the question is because, when you go on social media, the Instagrams and the TikToks of the world, I don't know about the rest of you, but I get a lot of, very interesting out there concepts. I saw a park that was invented with this Star Wars theme. The whole thing looks like Tatooine, and I've seen others that have leaned way far into social media. That's their whole marketing campaign, where they've got really interesting looking cabins that are up in the trees. I think Onera is one of those, and so it seems like that might be the initial hook, that gets people to look, but then maybe it's something different that keeps them there, keeps them coming back. Does that sound about right?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great way of characterizing it. Maybe the right way to frame it is novelty as a tool rather than a strategy. But
Mhm.
I agree with that, Doug. I think, not to keep coming back to AutoCamp, but there's obviously something novel to a lot of people about an Airstream, and I think it's a fabulous hook. But I think, I think that there's an enormous amount of thought and execution that goes on beneath the surface that's maybe, less responsible for grabbing that initial hook, but more responsible for, satisfying and keeping the guest once you've got them on the hook. And I
Mhm.
think I was just thinking about Todd's comments as well. And because I think about my own experiences as a hotel and a campground guest, and I think there's plenty of instances I can think about from my life, from a decade ago or longer, where there was something really novel in the room. People in the hotel business talk about surprise and delight, and novelty is clearly part of that. But I think you've got to view that as, again, it's sort of like a tool that you're using as opposed to the foundation for the business.
Yeah. I remember hearing Costco's business strategy a couple of years ago, and they were talking about how like 80, 90%, of what they do is commodity stuff, but that 10, 20% is a treasure hunt, they call it. It's like this rotating, stock of stuff that's just designed to delight, and surprise, right? Kind of like a rotating tap also at a local pub, like it's an opportunity to audition, new things and see what works, maybe a trial run, so to speak. Um,
When we're doing a lot of resort and hotel design, I'd use different words, but we did always want to make sure that there was that money shot, that shot of the the hammock that sits over the water, or the swing that looks like you're swinging out into a massive gorge, or a wedding pavilion that has an amazing sunset behind it, or something to that effect. And those are all really, really important, particularly get that Instagram moment, to get that thing that makes people think, I want to be in that picture. I want to stand next to that thing. I want to sit in that hammock or whatever. But the issue always is, okay, well, you've got them there. Now you got to keep them there. And that's not going to keep them there. It's how well are you executing on all the key touch points of their stay. And I think in relation to a lot of the brands that have come out recently, I think everybody's learned that when they see the guest comments, it's not about, oh, I got to stay in a safari tent, or I got to stay in an Airstream, or a vintage trailer, or those aren't the comments that typically come back. The comments are more around what they did and what they experienced while they were there. And I think a lot of the operators have identified that very, very clearly. And so when you go to these places now, you will see, a chalkboard of all the things that are happening that day. There's stone painting by the creek. There's a interpretive walk through the mushroom area, or there's, whatever it is, they're acknowledging that they can't get them to come back unless they create and program some experiences for the guests.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you guys are approached, with a deal, it looks like we've got a lot of folks here that are interested in improving and transforming. When someone approaches you with something, that for investment, or sale, perhaps, in your case, Todd, what are the first couple of things that you look for? What typically rings your bell, right away, and gives you a clear green flag that, this would be something that you want to pursue further?
There's kind of two buckets, really. The one is where we're going to do a value add acquisition, where there's a really well located asset in a great market that we're not in yet, or we're there, but we want more stuff in that particular market. What's the demand for it right now, and what's the number that we got to get in terms of fixing deferred maintenance or adding enough revenue generating building or facility or whatever to actually make our numbers work. And then the other bucket is where it's really been maintained well, and they are doing good business. They've got good people. They're able to retain good people. Now, then it's sort of, okay, we'll acquire that, and hopefully we can keep everybody, and hopefully we can build a little bit on top of that, and that our outlay from a CapEx perspective moving forward is not going to be that great. But all of the stuff that we look at everywhere, people, labor, workforce, housing, this is a huge issue for us. And it's something that we're trying to lean into to make sure that whether it's existing assets we're operating or it's stuff we're looking to buy, how are we going to be able to do the things, that we want to do for our guests? And that takes people typically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's probably there's like a boring answer and an interesting answer to your question, Doug, because again, there's so many parts of outdoor hospitality, right? I mean, there really aren't that many buyers out there right now buying, stabilized, upscale glamping resorts just for cash flow, just to clip a coupon. But there's plenty of those buyers out there in the RV industry, which is just a more mature market. So I think, what's appealing to those buyers probably depends on what type of asset you're talking about and what type of buyer they are. My generalization would be in the RV campground industry, you've probably got, for those more stabilized, cash flow type deals, those buyers are looking for the boring things, proof of cash flow, history, good accounting records, financeability. They want to make sure their bank is happy. And then in the part of the market that that we play in and that I think Todd plays in more, it's probably more of a focus on those value add type opportunities. And that's a little bit less on the administrative side and much more on these more kind of, big commercial questions like, is there a fit for market here? Maybe the results last year aren't showing me like a screaming cap rate if I buy this property, but maybe there's something in there which validates that there's an incredible opportunity here if we can solve, these five problems as a buyer. So yeah, I think there's again, it kind of depends a little bit on the situation.
Mhm.
Doug, I think what's really interesting here that we've talked a bit about, of course, differentiation through novelty. We talked a bit about differentiation, even as Todd touched on with the critical components of operations. And it's really also thinking about that. How does that create accretive value in the long run in terms of also operating across a full year? We are in the glamping world. We are exposed to the elements. Most places are highly seasonal. That doesn't mean it's the same operational experience or challenge for employees, for customers throughout the entire time. So, really thinking through all of these unique decisions in terms of whether it be novelty or whether it be amenities. Or even price points, we've got to always think through how it results in a healthy business and how it impacts our employees too. Because ultimately, they're going to be the ones that'll be deferring or creating that value for the customer. As we know, novelty won't keep people coming back, but oftentimes it's the employees and the experience that they're having. And as Todd touched, most places in glamping and outdoor hospitality, of course, challenge for good employees. So how do we even think through the entire operation from front of house customer experience to back house employee experience and bringing that all to the fore in terms of a healthy, stable operation throughout the year, whether it's the dead of winter or middle of a 100-degree summer? And I think
Mhm.
this is where it's really interesting when we think about differentiation. We can't just think 100% locked in on the customers, but how we better take care of our employees so that they can in turn take care of their customers. And you see that playbook in the Four Seasons of the world. You see that playbook in the top cruise lines in the world, where employees are stuck on a floating island for 9 months at a time. So how do they stay motivated, happy, healthy to take good care of their customers? And I think this is part of something that I know I certainly experienced at AutoCamp and certainly seen it both as a customer as well.
Is there a place where you guys have been, that you felt um like you experienced something special, like there's kind of a secret sauce, there, that stands out in your mind as an example of someone that really nailed that, that differentiation question and provided something really unique and special? I
I'm
I, I
I'm
haven't.
letting someone else go
The
first.
the silence is not good.
I'll bite. I'll bite on that real quickly. I think there's a lot out there that have done really well. I feel
Yeah.
like Irene Wood at the Fields of Michigan. I feel like she really was able to create something great out of a blueberry farm. It's not particularly big, right? But I think she was able to tap into the Chicago, hour and a half, 2 hour drive radius, and get a very Michigan experience quite close into the city. I think she did a great job. She also leaned into food and beverage, which was great, and she leaned into design, which was great in the public areas. There's I could talk about a lot of places, but I think that talking about taking something out of really nothing, she did a great job in that. I was going to mention earlier when, a couple of the commonalities in this sector, and I want David to answer and on the places, because that's a great question. But I think a big challenge that goes across the board in this sector, a number of challenges, but one is, while I feel the demand for the product remains super high and the supply continues to be constrained, when you in a general aspect around the US and probably globally as well. But when you look at your specific site or your particular place, or a place you want to go build an outdoor hospitality venture of some sort, it's very challenging to really do the underwriting. I used to say at AutoCamp that we every site is completely different and every market is wildly different, from the environment to the visitor flows to your site and its elevation and the environment, all of that stuff. It's always different. So when you're doing a new one, you do have to reinvent the wheel every time. And so you need to have a reinvent the wheel team, and you have to have a mindset that you it's totally unique. And so when you're looking at supply and demand in that particular market, it's really hard to get the data. It's really hard to understand whether it's going to work. That's difficult. And then going back to the workforce and workforce housing, it's really difficult to nail that as well in certain markets. So that's just a general statement I would make about when we're looking at assets and stuff like that. They're all different, and it is a challenge to really get your underwriting, who's going to stay and why, and how much will they pay, and are you going to get slammed with other supply at the same time, and how are you going to position yourself against other local supply. Anyway, that was just a general comment. David, I'd love to hear what you got to say about amazing experiences that have been developed.
Yeah, no, I've also been lucky enough to stay at Irene's property, Fields of Michigan, and also had a great experience there. I've been fortunate enough to have great experiences at different ends of the price point spectrum and service level. I'll give a little shout out to a property we invested in West Marin County in California called the Lodge at Marconi. You know, that's probably at the more full service end of the outdoor hospitality spectrum. It's an old lodge property, over 50 years old, that is located in a small state park in a place called Tomales Bay. And our partners, the developers, did an amazing job repositioning this old lodge that really hadn't had any money go into it for a long time, and delivering a hospitality experience that just feels completely unique, completely just a very unique affinity with nature when you stay there, and still feels very comfortable and like you're getting a legitimate hospitality experience. But then at the other end of the spectrum, I've always enjoyed staying at some of the Postcard Inn properties that I've visited. Used to be Getaway, acquired by Marriott at the end of last year, and I think, it's just a completely different type of experience. There is no service, there is no, hospitality, if you like, in the form of interpersonal service. It's not about that. It's about a quiet place to rest in a tiny house in the woods. And I think that sort of illustrates what's probably my strongest opinion on this topic of experiences in outdoor hospitality, is that I don't think it's as simple as, more is better. I think that, like, getting trapped in an arms race of, we need to do more, we need to do more, we need to do more is not, I don't think that's usually the right way to think about it. I think it's more about trying to figure out what it is that makes your location different. I completely agree with Todd. I think one of the challenges in outdoor hospitality is kind of the other side of the coin of what makes it such an interesting industry as well, which is that every experience is unique, which means that unfortunately it's difficult to just take one model and then, copy paste it 10 times. You've got to understand what's unique about each individual location and what the people in that market are looking for. But I think that, more important than just the question of, like, how much can I add, is what can I add that's additive to that experience and makes it feel unique. And I think that, yeah, again, for me, like, just those two properties I mentioned, kind of two different ends of the spectrum, but I feel like they both executed really, really well in their own version of outdoor hospitality.
Mhm.
I think too, sorry, Douglas, I just want to add in, I think too that when I look at the word hospitality, there is the part where you're taking care of somebody and there's people involved. But I really like the part of hospitality where you're just pre-thinking what the guest needs, and you're providing the facilities and the amenities to provide that need to them. So it didn't take any people. You pre-thought of how people are going to interact with the property and nature and with each other. And that's the key, I think, for me, of all the places that I think of. Like, I think of Bobby Frisch's places, Firelight Camp, and I think of the Land, or used to be Yonder, Escalante. They all did this. They all did one key thing, which I think was great, was they made it really easy to create community, whether that community is with your loved ones and your group you're with, or with people you've never seen before. They don't look like you. They don't come from the same economic background as you. They don't come from the same part of the world as you or the country. And they've created spaces to get community. Because my core belief is that the reason that there is so much demand for outdoor hospitality is because so many people are siloed and on their phones or in their world. And when they go out and they experience nature, they find that they're freed up to interact with other people, devoid of what bubble they may come from. And so I think that to answer your question, your original question, where have you felt things special? It's where people have forethought that element, that people are going there to commune with nature, but really to commune with each other as well, and to experience that freedom to interact with others. And so their design encourages that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's something that we thought a lot about, with Hostel Cubes, because on the one hand, you have this model where people do go, to the outdoors to kind of withdraw, from the hustle and bustle and have a place, where they can recharge, without all that stimulation, right? But it also seems like when you create that, in a place where there are other people experiencing the same thing, and you have this opportunity, this intersection, where they meet each other, you've created, a moment where there's can be these serendipitous interactions, you know, um, and so I think when I think about designing these things now, it's kind of like you need to provide people the option, to interact, and to kind of be in a place where that community happens, but not the obligation, right? They can still, you know, feel safe, in their own little capsule, or, whatever the accommodation is, they can have their own space, right? Does that does that ring true?
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I I completely agree with you, Doug and Todd. I don't think that it I don't think that it's necessary that community be a part of the identity of an outdoor hospitality project. And again, I was talking about postcard cabins before, and they specifically designed for the opposite of community. They literally I I haven't spoken with someone there about this, but I it seems implied in the way that they design their properties that they're laid out to encourage you to not talk to your neighbor, you know. But so I don't think it's necessary, but I do think it is an incredible opportunity in outdoor hospitality, and it's something that personally is extremely exciting to me. I often joke with people that if you think about the life cycle of a hotel consumer, you know, someone who starts off at age, I'm from Australia, so we've got this culture of, backpacking around Europe or the States or wherever. And to me, there's this irony that you can start your life as a traveler, as a hotel consumer in a $25 a night, dirty hostel and, pick a city, and you make friends that you might keep with you for your whole life. And then, as you go throughout life, your spending power increases. Maybe you do really well, and all of a sudden, eventually you get to a point where you're big shot and you're staying at Ritz-Carlton's, and not to dig on Ritz-Carlton or any other brand, but they're probably the least likely places in the hotel universe where you go and sit at the bar and you naturally strike up a conversation with someone. That's probably the place where your neighbor at the bar is going to, look like you've got two heads if you do that. And I think for me, one of the things that I've always found deeply inspiring about outdoor hospitality, and I do think AutoCamp did a terrific job of this and noticed this, is that for some reason, in outdoor hospitality, I think it is partly because of the novelty. I think it is because a lot of those things that you mentioned before, Todd, that people I think, just don't care about as much anymore. The valet, the bell desk, the concierge, a lot of that stuff is stripped away. And so in outdoor hospitality, when it's done well, you've got people sitting around a campfire, they're out of their ordinary environment, and there's just something magical about that moment that gets people talking to each other. And I think Todd was 100% right. Part of the opportunity in outdoor hospitality is, I think is to kind of to restore this balance that people are craving, between their connection to a computer screen and their connection to the outdoors. But part of it is also, I think, another imbalance which people are craving, which is to restore the connection with other people. And I think there is an enormous opportunity here. Like I said, I don't think that needs to be at the heart of the identity of every outdoor hospitality project, but I think it's an enormous advantage that this industry has got, that people should try and take advantage of when they can.
Mhm.
David, it's Doug, I just want to layer onto that. David, I think it's a really astute observation. And tipping the hat again to AutoCamp, I think also one thing too that, as Todd indicated, so many people now are remote workers, they're digital nomads, they're working from their home, and that connection has really been left in 2D as we are now. And so when they do escape to somewhere, it's not only a connection with each other, but oftentimes it's a connection to themselves, their interests, their passions, their hobbies, the stuff that for so long they've kind of forgotten, either post-pandemic or because they're kind of caught in the rat race of always connected. And nowadays, the beauty of these devices is we're always connected. The downfall is we're always connected. And sometimes it's harder than ever to disconnect and reconnect with ourselves, our loved ones, and the things that make us unique and that we truly get fulfilled by. I think outdoor hospitality, more than anywhere, allows for people to really connect back with those passions, the purpose of their life, and the things that make them smile and feel fulfilled, and share those with other like-minded people.
Mhm. For sure. Well, at this point, we've got about 14 minutes left in this scheduled call. So, if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to submit them here. It looks like we've got one, and this is our first time experimenting with the Answer Live feature, but I'm gonna click the Answer Live button and see what happens. I'm gonna read it before I do, though. It says, "Who are the institutional and middle market investors interested in this space? How do they feel about emerging managers with limited track record, 2 to 3 boutique hotels, who want to operate?" And so I think both of you guys probably have some history with that. Um, so I'm going to click this button, and uh, either of you want to take that? I know I would think, Whitman Peterson, was one of the investors that stepped into AutoCamp, but I know there are others out there that are investing, but you guys might be closer to that than we are.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little difficult for me to kind of name check at this point, just given I'm a little bit less connected to the market than I was then, since we're kind of doing our own things. But I again, not to kind of like sidestep the question, it definitely depends on what type of asset you are. If you're an RV park, I think it's likely that the answer to that question is different. I mean, there's clearly more institutional money in the RV campground industry than there is in glamping, at least right now. But I would argue that the trend is towards more institutionalization, not less, on the glamping side as well. And Whitman Peterson, I think you could describe them as being, pioneering on the institutional side in that space. But there have been some deals done. There was a public REIT that did one of the Onera deals. There's a few other data points out there. I would say, I mean, the challenge is that you also, raising capital, you're obviously also, you know, subject to the whims of the capital markets in general. And, unfortunately, the market has probably trended more risk off in the last 6 months. Um, which I think just makes it hard for anyone raising capital, whether you're doing something mainstream or, off the fairway like glamping.
Mhm.
Um, so what do people want to see? I mean, unfortunately we have this chicken and the egg problem in capital raising in any type of alternative real estate, which is that what your investor wants to see is track record, history of cash flow, proof of replicable cash flow and downside protection. And they want to see, the other thing they really want to see typically is financeability as well. But the problem is when you're trying to do something new, you have this chicken and the egg issue where, you can't demonstrate that proof of concept without, the capital partner stepping up. Um, I do think that is a tougher problem to solve, unfortunately, right now than it was a year ago. But I'm absolutely convinced that the trend is still towards more capital, not less in the space. And maybe that's a great segue to Todd, who is going to, clean up buying a whole lot of interesting opportunities in what is otherwise a challenging market.
Mhm.
I'll bite on that question in maybe a different way, and I'm kind of second guessing where the question is coming from. And on the back part of it, which is, would you take an operator that only has a couple of boutique hotels or whatever? Would they be interested in that? And my answer would be, it depends. And the depends is, if it's an $80 million asset, that might be a bit challenging. If it's a $5 million asset, then and you can manage a P&L at a small boutique hotel, you're probably fine. But kind of leading on from David's chicken and egg situation, there's the other dichotomy, which is there isn't a lot of investors at that $5 to $10 million range, and there's probably more at the $50 million plus range. And so if your project is somewhere in the middle, it's tough, between if you're just going to go do a 3 to, I don't know, $10 million project or something like that, you're going to fund it with an SBA loan or USDA loan. They're going to look at you as principal, and you're the one that's going to, wear this, and you're going to be involved in a day-to-day, then you're probably fine with your level of experience. To the contrary, if it's, a $50 million project and you're going for very institutional money and institutional lending, you might want to have a year of this actual asset and running it profitably before that happens. I don't know. Does that sound right, David? I mean,
Yeah, no, I
struggle
completely
with that.
agree. I completely agree with that. Yeah, sometimes people in the brokerage community say that it's harder to raise $10 million than $100 million.
Yeah.
But the issue is that $100 million investor is, definitely holding their GP to a very high standard and wants to see all the historical stuff that Todd said. I think the other challenge is that, for the real institutional players that have come to dominate the hotel industry these days, $100 million might not be enough. And they may say, okay, like, this deal is interesting, but I also want to feel really good that you can go and replicate this concept 5 or 10 more times. So I'm not spending, all this energy getting comfortable on this first one, and then we never do another one together again. Which comes back to Todd's question, which I think again is one of the opportunities, but also one of the challenges in this industry, which is that I think it is a little bit harder to tell that story in outdoor hospitality than it is if you're going out and just building a Hampton Inn or something like that. So I think those are some of the challenges. What's the good news? I think one piece of good news in outdoor hospitality is that, unlike a traditional hotel, you often can build a 5-room, version of a campground or a glamping property. And I think that you can see examples in our industry of really savvy, hustling entrepreneurs with a vision and the ability to execute, who have done an amazing job building a small subscale type property in the space. And that might mean 5 rooms or 10 rooms or 15 rooms. And they're generating a proof of concept that they can build on later. I do think you have got an opportunity to kind of like incrementally, bootstrap your way to success in this space, and that's a luxury that a traditional hotel developer does not have access to.
Hmm.
And as Todd said, that might involve some combination of, friends and family round plus an SBA loan or something like that. I think that's a much more realistic entry point for first-time developers in this space than trying to go out and find an institutional partner.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. Well, plot twist, the follow-up question, to this clarified that they were asking about luxury to ultra luxury experiential wellness resort, is the sector asset class they were talking about. And so um, we were talking to Luxury Frontiers, Luca Franco, who's, that's kind of their specialty. And so that's one resource for whoever the anonymous attendee is that asked that question. I think that'd be an interesting group to talk to. Um, but uh, if that relates to this, the how do they feel about emerging middle market investors? Um, I'd be curious what your guys' thoughts on this are, but I mean, I worked for a private equity firm, for quite a while, over a decade, and I think the experience question would be how much is that related, to the luxury, ultra luxury experiential wellness. I think a boutique hotel in a city center that was a motel conversion that's now more like a joie de vivre, kind of, thing is not maybe as directly related to that ultra luxury level, of um, service that you might be talking about there. Uh, but there are people doing that ultra luxury experiential wellness resort. It's very specialty, and it really depends a lot on the land. I think we were looking at that for a consulting project, and we brought an architect out, and basically, it was really close, to being nice enough, but not nice enough. There was just there were so many criteria that you have to meet if you're going for that ultra luxury thing, where you can't be below, somebody else. You don't want to be on the way to somewhere else. You kind of want to be at the end of the road, elevated. There's a whole uh, there's a whole psychological element to being the best, if that's what you're trying to go for. And so if you want to email us separately on that, then maybe we could approach that, with more precision, if we have a little more information. But I don't see any other questions coming in. We got 28 attendees here, so we've got a couple more, but if anyone else has questions, please pitch them into the chat there.
I'll expand on the luxury thing, Doug. We've got,
Mhm.
30 seconds to do so. I agree with what you said. And I think, Todd made the point earlier about how difficult it is to underwrite in outdoor hospitality. I think I think there are a lot of extra challenges that come with trying to do especially high-end luxury in outdoor hospitality. We've touched on a lot of them already. Access to labor. You need more bodies to deliver that experience. A lot of these markets, it's hard to find a lot of qualified labor. You obviously need to raise more capital. We've talked about why that's hard. But I think going back to Todd's point about underwriting, my biggest concern with ultra luxury and outdoor hospitality is always that, if you're going for like auto camp style price point, $300 a night, whatever, or lower, and you miss by 20%, a lot of business plans still work. If your business model is built on, trying to hit that $1,500 a night consumer, I think you're often, you may be off by $500, and it's so hard to know. Um, and a lot of business plans that are underwritten on those sorts of rates that miss by that much often just don't work. So I think there's opportunity for sure. I mean, clearly there is. What I'm and Geary have done out in Utah with their Camp Sarika property, what Four Seasons is doing, I think is proof of that. But it's kind of like the ultra high degree of difficulty, diving maneuver, if you like, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Yeah, I did a bunch of work on this area right before joining. In fact, last summer I did it for a Japanese company that wanted to do super high-end luxe place in out east. And I would say in case of ultra luxury and luxe, it's going to cost a ton of money, and you got to have that location. It's got to be, like the Hamptons or where you are located to that demand sector within a hour to 2 hour drive. It's got to be easy to get to, and it's got to have a history or an aspirational aspect of the location, like Napa, or the Hamptons or whatever, that type of thing. Then I think your chances of success are much greater. But if you're trying to pioneer a location and you don't have the gravitas of, Amman behind you, you better have the right location that you
Hmm.
can tap that market. Yeah.
So we got a couple more trickling in here. So two questions from Michael Powers. Do hot tubs outside for each cottage work? What about pickleball? And what about providing transportation to beach a few miles away? Um, so, I'll I'll say a few things, about this, and then open it up to you guys. I would love hot tubs, in our Joshua Tree location. I think it's top of our wish list is water features of some kind. Obviously every site's going to be different. You got to have utilities, you got to be able to clean it. There's a feasibility side to that, which is, how much do you think you can get? And so we have some designs that incorporated these if we were able to get the drainage and the cleaning and all the logistical part of it figured out. I think where we are, um, it could make a whole lot of sense. The challenge for us is there's a hierarchy of amenities, that we need. I think for that to pay off on an individual cottage, we need for our product, we ship camping cabins, and so we would want bathrooms first. That's kind of the next thing after you have the camping cabin is people want, a private bathroom. And so that would be probably next on our list. And then I think a private hot tub would be what we would need to complete our outdoor suite design. And so we've done some designs that have an enclosed outdoor suite area that's a cabin, a bathroom, and a hot tub. And so I think it can work in different locations, but I don't think it's kind of a universal thing. Pickleball too. I think it would be interesting for every property is going to have a separate business plan. Generally, you want people to have something to do, and that could be one of the things to do, but it would probably be pretty site specific. Um, any other thoughts on hot tubs or pickleball? Uh,
Um, yeah, I think they're great. I think the Anera project in Wimberley that just opened up, they spent a long time on getting that hot tub correct for their units. They actually sort of custom designed how they would fit and how they'd be maintained. So it was really great guest experience, but you didn't have to see all the machinery and all that was kind of sitting under the deck. And I know they really spent a long time to get it right. It's probably really expensive, but you're I think it's a high guest satisfaction and a guest amenity that people really appreciate. The trick is to not have to, you know, blow the bank maintaining them all the time.
yeah. And then just an administrative note, Michael, this may not be as big an issue historically in the camping and RV park industry, but the ADA rules, the Americans with Disabilities Act, do cover any site, where you're providing overnight accommodation. And if you offer private tubs or private hot tubs, for some units, then you'll probably have to incorporate that in a disabled access unit, and those come with special access tools that can get a little pricey, and then you have to figure out how to mount them, and so there's a lot of other add-on strings attached to that you just have to think about when you're designing it. And anyway, I think I would lump the transportation to the beach in there as well. It's another amenity that could be great, but if you provide it, I think that's lower down the list of ADA things that you need to provide, but you may have to have an accessible van at some point, and you have to figure out how you're going to staff it, who's going to do the driving and whether that's really going to pay you back, in your location. And you probably also have to be big enough, to amortize that cost over the sites that you've got. Um,
Just to
all right,
quickly
and then
interject
another
here, we
question.
have sorry, we have one more question in the Q&A, and we've got a few questions as well in the webinar chat. Just want to call attention to those. And
Okay.
everyone's schedule permitting, we're happy to get to those questions that we have currently. But you just want to call attention to that as well. Make sure we don't have people not get their questions answered. So,
Um, So I've got one more here. It's and Gavin, tell me if you're seeing something different. But I see one here. Are you seeing any interesting players or opportunities for glamping outdoor hospitality emerging in the mid-scale segment? And before we answer that, are there other ones, Gavin, that I'm not seeing?
Yes, so there are some people putting questions into the chat. So that's the Q&A section you're looking at. You should on the
Ah,
panel see another one for just the chat where people are also putting
okay.
questions. And
Would
also
you
thank you
mind?
to Vegas Glamping for your appreciation.
Are you able to copy and paste those into the Q&A section?
I don't believe I am. The Q&A is
Okay.
for attendees, but I will
Okay,
see what I
got
can
it.
do.
All right, no worries. Then I will figure. Oh, okay, there it
Doug, I
is.
can see this one here. We do have a question for the fellas from earlier, and the indication is, questions saying, are the days gone for new operators to penetrate the market at a seed level? And, if they still can, what would you recommend be their focus? Is that beautification of properties, amenities, or just the space itself? But really kind of looking at that seed level new operator perspective.
I'm happy to weigh in on that one quickly. I definitely don't think the days are gone. I think there's still an enormous amount of opportunity. I think this is like, the first inning really for a lot of outdoor hospitality. And I think we're going to see a lot of new brands and a lot of new operators emerge in the coming years that none of us have heard of right now. Um, and it's hard to say, okay, what should their focus be? Um, I think clearly, I think one of the themes from this discussion has been, there are different ways to skin the cat. There are different things that people are looking for in outdoor hospitality. For some travelers, it's isolation and quiet and retreat. For other travelers, it's community and adventure. you know, One thing we haven't talked about is like, what does adventure mean? It means so many different things for different types of travelers. For some, adventure is just being there, not sleeping in a hotel is the adventure. And having a glass of wine on the deck at the end of the day is, you know, is the pinnacle of the experience. And for others, it's all about the stuff that they're doing when they're there. They're staying near Yosemite and I don't know, they're like free soloing up El Capitan or something. It means so many different things. So I don't say this to sound like I'm copying out, but I don't think there is an answer to the question of like what should their focus be. I think the focus should be knowing who your consumer is and what they're looking for, and who your competition is and how you're trying to differentiate and offer something fresh. But the reality is, I don't even think you need to offer something completely fresh at this point either. If you took like all the companies that we've talked about today, AutoCamp, Collective, uh, Postcard Cabins, and the like, their portfolios still are really small relative to the number of people that go camping every year, stay in RV parks or stay in hotels. The industry is still very small. I think there's a lot of opportunity in all of these price points and segments. Um, it's the execution that matters more, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would answer that by saying clarity. Having clarity should be where their focus is. Clarity on what their site is and what it isn't, what their customers want and what they don't need, being authentic and delivering on that, and being mindful of the kind of the 3 to 5 to 10 year plan, and not getting out over your skis. So like just doing what you can do effectively, profitably, and then hopefully moving on and growing and whatnot, and then just trying to provide that great tight experience and a tight business plan. I think that's where the focus should be. But there's plenty of opportunity for new operators, for sure. The trick, I think, is doing it with a short, medium, and a long-term plan that's all executable, um, or not. Because I feel like a lot of the people that have been successful just did it, and they
Yeah.
didn't have that. But what they did do is they focused on everything they did was quality. There was design, there was thought through everything that they did, and they knew their customer. And each year, each new season, they built upon what they did the last season. Not necessarily in terms of adding more amenities or facilities, but they maybe made experience a little bit higher quality, or they penetrated different markets they didn't have, or they added weddings, or they added events, or they whatever. But they kept building each year and improving it. That's what I would say where people were successful.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like you're saying, being intentionally iterative, but always focused and looking through the lens of your ethos. What's authentic, what's your true to you and your place.
Yeah, I think you have to have the heart of an innkeeper at the end
Mm,
of the day. And if you've got
well
that,
said.
then if you've got the heart of the innkeeper and you can be financially successful, then like that old B&B operator that's been there for 25 years and they just kill it. The place is full all the time. They've got a good lifestyle, everything's happy, and they're sustainable on a long-term basis. I think if you can be like that, you can be an emerging operator and a new operator for sure.
There's a question here in the chat that I just love. Is there any bias of guess you can see on compost toilet versus flush toilets currently? If they both could exist within each site, does it impact the ADR? Um, so this one's fascinating for a couple of reasons. I won't get too arcane here, but in the camping cabin portion of the public resources code, you're not allowed to have hard plumbing, but that doesn't necessarily preclude you from having a composting toilet in a camping cabin. We haven't gone so far as to explore that, with people yet. I think we've been a little afraid, but I'm curious, have you guys seen any place where they've commercially implemented composting toilets, and do you have any um, understanding of how the guest reception has been to that concept?
Um, I've got a lot of experience in that. To be honest, I've got a little bit of experience, but not a lot. I would see there's definitely a difference in ADR between, not having a toilet and having one. That's for sure. And I would hope that the public bathhouse is something that's been done well, um, just to mitigate that price differentiation. But I've experienced compost toilets myself. I think having good ventilation is important. Um, but I don't know any comparison I've seen, David, maybe you have, between one place having the composting and the other one having flushing water, and the difference in price. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I mean, not I can't. Yeah, I'm not. I have experienced both, of course, but I can't think of any like side by side comparisons in a market that would um, allow me to answer that question properly either, other than to say what Todd already said. I definitely, absolutely think there is a huge step up, from no bathroom or shared bathroom to private bathroom. I think that is a just a non-starter for a lot of consumers. And so if you can add that, it unlocks a lot of guests for sure.
Mm.
The last thing I would say is that I do think that, again, this sounds like a cop out of an answer, but it does depend on other things. One property I think about a lot is a place here in California in Big Sur called Tree Bones, which is
Mm.
this unbelievable, yurt property right on the side of PCH with unbelievable views out over the Pacific Ocean. It is, there's nowhere like that to stay there. The experience of staying at that property is really special. And they have all shared bathrooms. And I think, and they still do, their ADR is probably, probably $300 or $400, I'm guessing.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people are willing, a lot of people who would normally not ever tolerate not having a private bathroom probably overlook it there because the rest of the experience is so special. So I think it's probably hard to look at all these things in a vacuum, but I agree with the hierarchy at least. Some toilets better than no toilet for sure.
Well, I'll share a quick anecdote. A couple of years ago, I went to a tiny home building workshop, and the facilitator was a young lady, probably 25. She was traveling around. She had been traveling around for the last year with her boyfriend. And it was a 3-day workshop. The third day is when we finally got to the bathroom question. And the composition of the crowd was very interesting. It was probably 60-70% ladies, and I would say probably a significant number of 50s and 60s year old women that were had pensions and were just interested in not paying a mortgage. And so that was her audience. She traveled around the country doing this all the time. And when it came to this subject, a lot of people just, were like, wait a second, you want me to use what? Sawdust? Like, like, how's that going to work? And her response to that, having had that objection from hundreds of people, was, it's really interesting. Americans seem to have this fetish with pooping on water, and like the flush makes it all, go away, purifies it, whatever. Uh, that does not have a basis in biological reality, but there is, definitely a customer preference for it. Um, I see in the comments they clarified that there was an Auto Camp Catskills um, uh, t toilet that had a pedal flush um, toilet by Sunmar. And so I don't know, if any of you have specific experience, with the comments for AutoCamp Catskills, but that was the one. It's good to know that those are out in the wild and at relatively high-end locations. And so there does seem to be some commercial proof that they're out there, and it doesn't seem to be killing them. I've heard good things about Catskills. All right. Well, I think unless there's anything else, I think we could probably abandon that topic. Um,
There is one last question here that I want to get back to. I know we're well over time here, so I appreciate everyone. But there was an earlier question that maybe one to even potentially consider wrapping up on, and that is, do you think that the hospitality industry is oversaturated with hotel-backed investment groups entering the space and shifting, the original outdoor hospitality ethos?
I would, I'm going to answer really quickly because I would love to hear Todd's answer to this question. And I hope none of my hotel industry friends are listening, but I just have a personal opinion that often in the hotel industry, you know, great brands, the life cycle of great independent brands is that they start from, very earnest roots. They've got a terrific reason for being. They resonate, they grow, and then eventually, Marriott or Hilton acquire them and or one of their peers, and eventually the magic is lost somehow. Um, I don't think that has to happen. I don't think that's true in every single case, but I do think a lot of the time, just personally, that's my opinion about what happens. But so I don't think that I haven't seen any evidence yet of like any of these, brands in outdoor hospitality that have affiliated with the big hotel companies, losing the magic. I do think it's just hard. It's hard to preserve the magic as you scale. It's hard to do something special. It's hard to do something special once, but it's then hard to do that special thing over and over and over again. So I think it is just inherent part of growing as a company and um, so I don't think it has to happen. I do think in the hotel industry it does happen, and I certainly don't think the industry is oversaturated for all the reasons we talked about before. But I do think this will be a new challenge for the industry, as it is for the hotel industry, for these brands and operators in figuring out how to preserve what made them special in the first place as they grow and partner with big hotel companies. But I want to hear what Todd thinks.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's oversaturated at all, just because having traveled around as many markets as I have, there's so many independent operators out there that are, maybe they're doing 10 or 20 or 30 units or whatever, and they're doing great jobs. They're creating great experiences. So I don't think it's oversaturated at all. One of the groups we haven't really talked about is Under Canvas, and that's one that I think KSL has done a really good job of that. I don't know. Maybe I have limited experience. I've been to a handful of them. And I've talked to the general managers of a few and guests and whatnot. And, Sarah Dusick started that. And then when KSL came in, they really did apply the rigor of a institutional investor to that business. And I think that's what was needed to get it to proliferate to the point where it is now. But I don't think that they lost the essence of what Sarah was trying to do. I think that when you when you go to the Grand Canyon or you go to Zion or you go to any of these places and you're able to go out into a national park, and you're able to experience that national park during the day, and then you go to an under canvas and you're in a pretty good tent. I've paid $150 to stay in one, and I've seen where they're getting $450 and when Ulam and Moab might be even more. I think they're giving that awesome thing where you've experienced a national park in a specific environment, and then you go at night and you're living in basically the same environment. It may not be, looking up at Half Dome, or it might not be, in the Canyon of Zion, but you're in the same general environment. And so you flew in from New York and you went to this you went to this national park, and then you stayed in it in the same environment in a tent in the night, and then you left 2 to 3 days later. That is wildly different than going and experience that environment and then spending the night in a Hampton Inn. I mean, to me, that is fantastic. And so I think they've been able to maintain that over time. So to date, knock on wood, at least for that example, I think they did not ruin it. But I think there's a lot of the big hotel companies, they need scale. They don't do anything to maybe get 20 or 30 outlets. They need 120 to 250 outlets. So it's going to take a long, long time before they're going to be able to penetrate at that level, at least in the US. Maybe globally might happen a little faster, but there's plenty of time, because I just don't think it's going to happen real quick. I mean, the hotel industry happens slow to begin with. I mean, when I did that W in 1997, I was in a hotel conference in 2016, and people asked the question, how do you define an independent boutique luxury lifestyle hotel? It's like 20 years. I'm like, what are you talking about? Why are we trying to define this thing that's been around for 2 decades? And so but that's just how slow the hotel industry moves. I remember in 1990 being at a hotel conference in Hong Kong, and somebody said, the wildest invention that's happened in the hotel industry in the last 30 years is they're starting to fold the end of the toilet paper on the toilet roll. It doesn't move fast.
Yeah.
Maybe faster now, but still not fast. Anyway.
What about towel art when you've got little towel animals on your bed? I thought that was a big
Yeah.
leap. That was
Yeah,
a big leap.
there was a tectonic shift in customer demand. Yeah.
I want to see animal characters made out of the toilet paper now. See if we can
Yeah.
combine those two worlds.
Yeah.
Well, to their credit, it was really interesting, after, 70 years of the formal commercial hotel industry being in existence since the Marriotts and the Hiltons started, that Weston was like, we should make a good bed, you know?
Mm,
Let's make a good bed. And it was like revolutionary, the heavenly bed, and then the shower. It was like,
yeah.
and then everybody else was like, oh man, you're right. Maybe we should make the bed better. Pretty basic stuff.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
Right.
they need to sleep here.
All right. Well, great discussion, everyone. I think seeing as we are, about 20 minutes over time, which is fine. I'm glad we were able to fill the time with, great content and a great discussion. That was fantastic. I think it's probably a good time to wrap things up. So I'd just like to express a very large thank you to Jeff and Doug from Hostel Cubed for helping put this together and sort of host and drive the discussion, and as well to our other guests, Todd and David. Thank you so much for coming on and adding your voices to this. I think this has been fantastic. Any final thoughts from anybody before we wrap things up for today?
well, really appreciate it, Gavin.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having
Thanks,
us.
guys. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just stay tuned for future entries in sort of this webinar series. We're very excited about it moving forward. So, all right. With that being said, just have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.